It was just another busy afternoon at the downtown diner. Customers flowing in and out, plates clattering, and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Among the hustle, Sarah, a young and kind-hearted waitress, was doing her best to keep up with the orders. She wasn't just good at her job, she truly cared about people. Whether it was a grumpy customer or a tired coworker, Sarah always had a smile and a helping hand. But that kindness, it was about to cost her everything. In the corner of the diner, quietly mopping the floor, was Joe, the janitor. He was older, his uniform faded, and his steps a little slow. Most people barely noticed him. He came in early, stayed late, and never complained. He kept to himself, rarely asked for help, and always tried to stay out of the way. But today, something was different. Joe looked paler than usual, and as he leaned on his mop, a small wobble in his step caught Sarah's eye. Without thinking twice, she rushed over to check on him. She offered him a glass of water and gently asked if he needed to sit down for a bit. Just then, Mr. Carlton, the diner's manager, stormed in. He was known for running the place with a strict hand and very little patience. Rules were rules, and he didn't like when anyone stepped out of line. When he saw Sarah helping the janitor instead of serving tables, his face turned red with frustration. Without asking questions, without listening, he snapped. In front of customers, staff, and a stunned Joe, Mr. Carlton fired Sarah on the spot. The room fell silent. Sarah stood frozen, stunned by this sudden cruelty. Joe tried to speak up, but the manager waved him off. People whispered. Phones came out. But Sarah, instead of getting angry, simply looked at Mr. Carlton and said something that made even the customers pause. There was something in her voice, calm, steady, and honest, that no one expected. And that was just the beginning. Because what no one in that diner knew was that Joe, the quiet janitor Mr. Carlton had dismissed so easily, wasn't just some old man with a mop. He had a story of his own. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just leave Mr. Carlton speechless. It turned the whole diner upside down. So what exactly was the truth? And how did Sarah's simple act of kindness lead to a twist no one saw coming? Stick around because you're not going to want to miss what happens next. The silence in the diner hung heavy. Sarah slowly took off her apron, her hands trembling but her face calm. Joe tried again to speak, his voice rough with age and emotion, but Mr. Carlton cut him off with a sharp glare and a cold, final go home. Sarah gave Joe a small nod, trying to reassure him, then turned and walked out of the diner she'd worked at for over 2 years, just like that. Fired for helping someone, but the story was far from over. Outside, Sarah sat on the curb for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. She wasn't angry for losing the job. What hurt more was how quickly someone's compassion could be mistaken for disobedience. And what about Joe? She'd seen something in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. There was a weight behind his quietness, a story he'd kept hidden. She didn't know what it was, but something told her this wasn't just about a glass of water. Inside the diner, things were tense. Staff exchanged glances, unsure what to say. Mr. Carlton barked orders like nothing had happened, but the mood had shifted. Customers whispered among themselves. A few had seen what went down, and one even followed Sarah outside to ask if she was okay. But Sarah was already thinking about something else, Joe. Joe had gone back to mopping like nothing had happened, head down, shoulders hunched. But his hands trembled slightly, and his eyes looked far away. He remembered a time when he wore a suit to work, when people respected him, listened to him. Now he couldn't even stand up without someone assuming he was just tired, or worse, useless. But that waitress, Sarah, she had seen him. Really seen him. and for that, she'd lost her job. Mr. Carlton, meanwhile, sat in his office going over receipts, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. He told himself Sarah had crossed a line, that he had done the right thing. But even he couldn't ignore the look in her eyes as she left. Not angry, not afraid, just disappointed. What Mr. Carlton didn't know was that Joe wasn't just a janitor. He had once owned a business. He had once been someone powerful. And the diner? It held more memories for him than anyone realized. He had taken the job not because he needed money, but because he needed something else entirely. And Sarah's kindness had brought all those hidden truths to the surface. The real question now wasn't whether Mr. Carlton had made a mistake. It was how big that mistake really was, and how long he had left before everything unraveled. The next day, Sarah woke up early, still replaying the moment she was fired. She hadn't told her parents yet. They already worried enough. Money was tight at home, and she'd been helping cover bills with her tips. Still, she couldn't regret helping Joe. Something about it had felt right, but part of her couldn't let it go. The way Mr. Carlton reacted, so harsh and immediate, didn't feel like a manager just enforcing a rule. It felt personal, almost like he was hiding something. Meanwhile, back at the diner, things weren't the same. The regulars noticed Sarah was gone. Some asked about her, and the staff gave vague answers, afraid of getting in trouble. The kitchen was running late, service was slower, and Mr. Carlton's temper was shorter than ever. And Joe? He moved quietly through the corners, still doing his job, but there was something new in his eyes, like the past had suddenly found its way back. Later that evening, Joe sat alone in the break room during his short dinner break, staring at an old photo he kept in his wallet. It was worn around the edges, the faces slightly faded. Joe in a sharp suit, smiling next to a sign that read Carlton Enterprises. He sighed, folded the photo carefully, and tucked it back into his pocket. Nobody at the diner knew he had once been the man behind that name. Especially not Mr. Carlton's son, David Carlton, the same man now running the diner like a kingdom. Yes, the rude manager who fired Sarah wasn't just a boss. He was the son of Joe's former business partner. Years ago, Joe had helped build Carlton Enterprises from the ground up. But when illness struck and he took a step back, David's father pushed him out. Quietly, legally, cruelly. Now the son managed this little diner, clueless that the janitor mopping his floors had once signed his father's paychecks. Outside the diner, Sarah was doing some digging of her own. She spoke to an older customer who remembered Joe from a long time ago. "He's not just some janitor," the woman whispered. "He used to be someone big." But something happened. No one ever talked about it. The pieces didn't quite fit yet, but Sarah's gut told her there was more to this story. And if Joe wouldn't speak up for himself, maybe it was time someone else did. Back in the diner, Joe looked out the window. He saw Sarah across the street, standing still, watching the building. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about a lost job or a rude manager's bad call. This was about truth, and it was coming for them all. The tension in the diner had reached a breaking point. Every glance between Mr. Carlton and Joe felt loaded with unspoken history, a silent battle neither dared to start. Sarah's absence was felt more keenly than anyone expected, and whispers about her firing spread beyond the walls of the small restaurant. Some customers sided with the manager, calling Sarah naive for stepping out of line, while others quietly admired her courage. Sarah wasn't done. She had started talking to former employees, neighbors, anyone who might know more about Joe's past, and the truth behind the mysterious downfall of Carlton Enterprises. The more she learned, the clearer it became that Joe's story wasn't just about lost power or money. It was about betrayal, broken promises, and a fight for justice that had been buried under years of silence. One evening, as the diner emptied out, Sarah knocked on the back door. Joe opened it slowly, surprised but not upset. "I found some things," she said quietly, pulling out a folded paper from her pocket. It was a copy of an old business contract, one that revealed how Joe had been forced out by the Carlton family, cutting him off without any warning or fairness. Joe's eyes darkened as he read it. "They made me disappear," he whispered. But if Joe thought the past was behind him, Mr. Carlton was about to bring it crashing back. David Carlton had noticed the growing tension and the quiet unrest among the staff and customers. He was no stranger to power plays and knew when a challenge was coming. Tonight, he called a staff meeting, his tone sharper than usual. "I want loyalty," he said, "and anyone who questions me is out." The words sent a ripple through the employees, but Sarah wasn't backing down. She wanted answers. And more than that, she wanted to make sure the truth came out before more damage was done. Meanwhile, Joe stood near the mop bucket, his hands clenched tight. The weight of the years, the humiliation of being reduced to a janitor in the place he once helped build, pressed down on him. Yet for the first time in a long while, he felt something flicker inside, a spark of hope fueled by Sarah's determination. Outside, the streetlights flickered as night deepened. A few regular customers lingered by the windows, watching the drama unfold in silence. The diner felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Just as Sarah was about to confront Mr. Carlton directly, a phone call came that no one expected, one that threatened to change everything. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the truth finally be heard, or would the silence continue to protect the lies? The moment to find out was right around the corner. The phone rang sharply, breaking the thick silence in the diner. Mr. Carlton's face tightened as he picked up, his usual confident tone faltering just a bit. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah and Joe watched closely from the back, sensing something bigger was about to unfold. After a few moments, Mr. Carlton hung up and turned toward the group, his eyes narrower than before. "That was the bank," he said. "They're freezing the diner's accounts. Apparently, there's been some suspicious activity tied to the business." His voice was low, but carried an edge of panic beneath the surface. Sarah's heart skipped. This wasn't just about a rude manager anymore. The diner itself, the place where Joe had spent his days mopping floors, and Sarah had served countless customers, was on the brink of collapse. But what suspicious activity? And how was Mr. Carlton connected to it? Joe stepped forward cautiously. "What kind of suspicious activity?" he asked. Mr. Carlton avoided his gaze. "I don't have all the details yet. But if this keeps up, the diner could be shut down for good." The room grew colder, the threat sinking in like a heavy weight. Sarah felt a surge of determination. She glanced at Joe, who looked older, worn down, but somehow ready to fight. Then just when it seemed the tension couldn't get thicker, Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked the message. It was from an unknown number. The text was short but chilling. "You don't know the whole story. Be careful who you trust." Her hands trembled as she showed the message to Joe. "What does this mean? Who would send something like this?" Before Joe could answer, the back door swung open, and a man neither Sarah nor Mr. Carlton had seen before stepped inside. He wore a worn jacket and a face marked by time, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that demanded attention. "I'm here for Joe," the stranger said quietly. "There are things you all need to know, things that change everything." Sarah's pulse quickened. Who was this man? Why had he come now, in the middle of the chaos? Mr. Carlton's jaw tightened, and his usual arrogance slipped for a moment. "You don't belong here," he said, stepping forward. "This is private business." The stranger didn't flinch. "Not anymore," he said. "Joe and I go way back." What happened to him wasn't just a business betrayal. It was part of something much darker. Joe looked stunned. Sarah held her breath. Mr. Carlton's face went pale, the lines of control starting to crack. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a rude manager firing a kind waitress or an unfair dismissal. It was about secrets hidden deep within the past, about lies that could ruin lives, and about a battle that was far from over. And now, with this unexpected visitor, the stakes had never been higher. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger. What would happen next? Would Joe's past finally catch up with him? And could Sarah's courage be enough to face what was coming? The answers were still hidden, waiting in the shadows, ready to change everything. The stranger's presence changed everything. He stepped forward slowly and pulled out a worn folder from his bag, placing it on the counter with a quiet authority. "My name's Mark," he said, "and I worked with Joe years ago, before all this mess. I've been tracking the truth behind Carlton Enterprises ever since." The room fell silent as Mark opened the folder, revealing documents, photos, and old emails. Proof that the Carlton family had been involved in illegal business deals that went far beyond simply pushing Joe out. The suspicious bank activity wasn't a mistake. It was part of a scheme David Carlton had been running to cover up those dark secrets. Mr. Carlton's face twisted in anger, but Mark didn't back down. "You've been laundering money through this diner. That's why the bank froze the accounts. And firing Sarah, that was just a distraction to keep anyone from digging deeper." Joe looked at Sarah, who nodded gently. This was more than a personal battle now. It was about exposing a long-buried injustice. With Mark's help, Sarah and Joe contacted the authorities. The evidence was enough to launch an investigation into David Carlton's actions. The manager who had once wielded power with cruelty suddenly found himself powerless. The diner's accounts were unfrozen, but the real victory was justice starting to take hold. Mr. Carlton was escorted out by investigators, his reputation shattered. Joe, once dismissed as a janitor, was finally seen for who he truly was, a man wronged, fighting to reclaim his dignity. Sarah was offered her job back, and more than that, a chance to help rebuild the diner into a place of respect and fairness. But just as relief began to settle, Mark pulled Sarah aside. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said quietly. "This isn't just about David Carlton or the diner. There's a bigger network behind all this. People who won't stop until they're exposed." Sarah's eyes widened. The fight was far from over. And then, in a moment that stunned everyone, Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This," he said, "holds everything. Every secret, every name. But if this falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy more than just us." The room tensed again. The battle for truth had been won, but the war was just beginning. Sarah looked at Joe, Mark, and even the empty office where Mr. Carlton had stood moments before. They were no longer just a waitress, a janitor, and a stranger. They were a team ready to face whatever came next. And as the diner's neon sign flickered on in the night, one thing was clear. Kindness had sparked a revolution, and no one would be silent anymore. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. With the evidence Joe, Sarah, and Mark had uncovered, authorities began a thorough investigation not just into David Carlton, but into the larger network that had quietly pulled strings behind the scenes. The diner, once a place shadowed by tension and fear, slowly became a symbol of hope and justice in the community. Sarah returned to work, welcomed back not just by grateful coworkers, but by regular customers who admired her courage. She didn't just serve coffee and meals anymore. She helped rebuild a place where kindness mattered, where fairness wasn't an afterthought. Joe, once dismissed as just a janitor, now walked with a quiet pride. People stopped him in the street to thank him for standing tall despite everything. The faded photo he kept was replaced by new ones, smiling faces from the diner's reopening celebration. Mark stayed close, a steady reminder that sometimes the fight for what's right doesn't end quickly. He worked alongside Sarah and Joe, helping spread awareness and offering support as the truth continued to surface. Mr. Carlton was no longer part of the picture. His downfall was swift, a reminder that power built on lies doesn't last. But Joe knew the story didn't just belong to him or David. It was a lesson about how easily people can be forgotten when they lose status or wealth, and how important it is to see the humanity in everyone, no matter their role. Sarah often thought back to that day she helped Joe with a glass of water, never imagining it would lead to uncovering a hidden battle for justice. It was a reminder that even small acts of kindness can ripple far beyond what we expect. And sometimes, standing up for what's right means risking everything. The diner's neon sign shone brighter than ever now, a beacon not just of food and service, but of second chances and truth. Customers came not just for the meals, but to support a place where stories like Joe's and Sarah's could be heard. In the end, it wasn't just about a rude manager firing a waitress for helping a janitor. It was about the power of empathy, the strength in standing together, and the courage it takes to face the truth, even when it's hard. As Sarah wiped down the counter one evening, she caught Joe's eye and smiled. They both knew the road ahead might still have bumps, but whatever came next, they would face it together. Because sometimes the smallest acts can change everything. And in a world that can feel cold and unfair, that's a story worth telling.